Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jacqueline and this is Makeup Tales. Each week I narrate a scary story while I do my makeup. And if that is something that interests you, I suggest to like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure when you subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know when I post a new video. Disclaimer. The following story is intended for a mature audience and may contain graphic depictions, death, gore, sexual themes, and adult language. Viewer discretion is advised. Today's story is the continuation of Be Careful When Adopting by Reddit user DarkMindAngelEyes. This is chapter 2. I yelled for John to call the police as I knelt down beside the bathtub, her once tanned arm hanging off the side of the tub as blood dripped from her finger to the floor. Both of her arms were cut, from her small delicate wrists all the way up to the inside of her elbow. I held my sister's lifeless body, pulling her as close to me as possible. Her blonde hair had been soaked red from her blood. Her bright ocean blue eyes had turned pale. Her body was already turning cold to the touch. I knew there was nothing anyone could do for her. John walked into the bathroom after calling the police. He turned the water off, trying to pull me away from my sister. My clothes were soaked in bloody water and tears. I wouldn't let go. I couldn't. She was my little sister, and I was supposed to protect her. This time, I couldn't. I failed her. If I had known this would happen, I never would have asked her to come over that night. I would have called her. I would have just figured something else out instead. As I held her, her head slumped over onto my shoulder, her blood-soaked hair falling into her face. She was only 24. She had so much to live for. She had so much left to do with her life. A loud knock on the front door. Sound so loud that it startled both of us. John went to answer it as I held onto my sister, streams of tears falling from my eyes. I couldn't hold them back. I couldn't be strong, not right now. The police followed John into the bathroom. I had to let go, even though I didn't want to. John pulled me up and held me tight as I sobbed into his chest. When I finally let go of him, John grabbed me some clothes to change into, as what I had on was soaking wet and causing me to shiver. The police started their investigation. Of course, we couldn't tell them everything that had happened that night. We would sound completely insane. I walked into the living room with John and our sweet baby boy following me. He was giggling and laughing as John held him. A couple of hours passed with the medical examiner coming to pick up the body. People were in and out of the house, coming and going. A couple of the officers kneeled down in front of John and myself. One of them made goofy noises and faces to distract our son while we talked. They asked, why she was over that night and why we hadn't been home. I explained to them that I asked her to watch our son while we went to the hospital because John had a small accident. No one questioned how he was stabbed in the back of the arm. After talking for a while, they told us that it would be ruled a suicide. There was absolutely no evidence to be ruled as anything other than a horrible suicide. They found the knife she had used. It had fallen under her when it slipped out of her hand as her body became lifeless. Their best guess was that she was probably severely depressed and overly stressed. They said someone would be by in the morning to clean up the blood in the bathroom. That the best thing we could do right now was to focus on our new bundle of joy to help us get through such a hard time. After everyone left, I called a few family members to let them know what happened. Everyone was shocked that she would kill herself. In the back of my mind, I knew it wasn't something she would do. I knew something or someone would have pushed her to do it. I laid the baby down in his crib, turning his monitor on to make sure he was fine throughout the rest of the night. John and I laid down in our bed to try to get a few hours of sleep. John, like always, fell asleep very quickly. I don't know what it is about men, but it seems as soon as their head hits the pillow, they're asleep. Me, on the other hand, took a while to fall asleep. I laid there, thinking about everything as I listened to him snore. I couldn't have been asleep for more than an hour when I was woken up to a strange voice. It was deep, almost growling voice. It almost sounded demonic. John was still fast asleep, completely oblivious to it. He could sleep through pretty much anything. I looked over at the monitor. My son was standing up in his crib, looking at something just out of reach of his camera. His arms reaching out to whatever it was. After a moment or two, I could see this shadow-like figure coming closer and closer to my son. It turned its head and was looking straight into the camera, almost like it could see me. It had bright, red, beady eyes. I jumped out of bed, running to his room. I could hear pictures falling off the walls as I ran to his room, my feet hitting the floor harder than they ever had before. I swung open the door, expecting someone or something trying to get to my son. However, that wasn't what I opened the door to. My son was sound asleep in his crib. No sounds, no weird voices, just him sleeping. Walking over to his crib, I rubbed my hand against his soft little cheek, telling myself I was just imagining things from a lack of sleep, or it was just a dream that felt very real. My heart was still pounding as I laid down on the floor next to his crib. Chapter 3. The next morning, the sunlight was shining through my son's window in his nursery, shining down perfectly on my back as I laid on the eggshell-colored carpet, feeling the sunlight warming my back, causing me to begin to wake up. My eyes opening softly as I rolled over onto my back, remembering that I fell asleep on the floor of his room last night. My few-month-old son was already awake, standing up in his crib that he was quickly beginning to outgrow. Leaning his head over the railing as his hands held onto the railing. He was looking down at me with his big, beautiful brown eyes. He began to smile and giggle as he noticed I was waking up. Reaching his hands out for me to pick him up, I smiled at him as I laid there. I could hear John's soft footsteps walking down the hall. Even for someone as tall as John, he always walked quietly, especially through our house, never fully putting his heel all the way down onto the ground before taking another step. He softly opened the door to see me still laying on the floor. Da, 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 our son said as he giggled. Reaching his hands out to John, he had definitely started to warm up to John since last night. This morning, something about our little boy just seemed different. John leaned over to pick him up. Our son wrapped his arms around his father's neck as he held him in his arms. He touched the back of John's arm. "Boo boo, go bye-bye, Daddy," our son softly said as he rubbed John's arm. Our little boy was starting to look more like a 2-year-old than a 3-month-old. Instead of crawling or the typical baby stumbling around walk, he was walking like he had been doing it for a while. All the clothes we had bought for him for a newborn up to 12 months old no longer fit. His short red hair was now past his chin. More and more freckles were appearing on his little round apple cheeks. Something about today just seemed brighter. The air around us seemed lighter. The air smelled sweeter for the first time in weeks. We all felt happier, and we were all smiling. Everything felt like it would be okay, like it would all work out. My cell phone began ringing in the living room while John was holding our son. I got up off the floor to answer my phone, walking down the hall careful, making sure my bare feet didn't step on the glass that had taken up most of the hallway floor. By the time I picked up my phone, it had already stopped ringing. I played the voicemail, turning the speaker on. "This is the medical examiner's office calling for Mrs. Johnson regarding Miss Lynn's remains. Please call us back at your earliest convenience. Thank you and have a wonderful day." The message ended. I looked over at John, who had followed me into the living room. His face seemed slightly concerned after we listened to the message. I shrugged my shoulders as I placed the phone back down on the end table next to the couch. He raised his left eyebrow as he bounced our baby in his arms. "Baby, aren't you going to call them back? The message seemed kind of important, John softly said to me. I am after breakfast. Whatever it is, can wait till then. Besides, they were probably just calling to say they had finished the autopsy and we should send the people from the funeral home to pick up her body. To be prepared for the funeral. I'm sure everything is fine, I said as tears began to collect in my eyes, trying to hold them back. I quickly wiped my eyes before the tears could leave my eyes, trying to hide my pain and sorrow. The pain grew in my heart from the loss of my sister, the person I was so close to for basically my whole life, the person that was always there for me, the person I would run to in the middle of the night whenever she needed anything. John set our son down on the couch before going into the hallway to clean all the broken glass. Our little boy was already big enough to sit by himself to watch TV. I started breakfast for the three of us. I tried not to think too much of the voicemail left by the examiner's office. I scrambled some eggs and cut some fresh fruit, preparing our plates before placing them on the dining room table, just in time to see John walking back into the living room after he finished cleaning up the hallway. The three of us sat down at the table. My phone began to ring again as we started to eat. This time, I completely ignored it as we ate breakfast. Whoever it was could wait till we finished breakfast. The phone kept ringing, one call after another, not even waiting a minute or two before calling back. Whoever it was could wait till we were done. After we finished eating, I put the dishes into the sink before walking over to my phone to see what all the fuss was about. I picked it up to see I had over 15 missed calls and 3 voicemails, all from the same number. It was the medical examiner's office again. I played the messages on speaker once again. Mrs. Johnson, please call the medical examiner's office as soon as you can. It's urgent, the first voicemail said. Mrs. Johnson, I really need to speak with you about your sister's remains. Please call me back. The voice grew with urgency and worry with each message. Mrs. Johnson, it is an emergency. Please answer your phone. The test results came back. The last message was extremely shaky and almost sounded scared. Like he couldn't wrap his brain around what happened or how the test results came back. The sound of his shaky voice was more than enough to scare me. The small hairs on the back of my neck stood straight out as goosebumps ran across my entire body. Walking into the backyard, my phone in my hand to sit down on one of the oversized rocking chairs overlooking my flower bed, which was filled with bright red roses with tall sunflowers behind them. I picked up my pack of cigarettes and my bright blue lighter. Taking one of the cigarettes out of the pack, I pressed the callback button on my cell phone as I held a cigarette to my lips as I lit it. I slowly let out a small cloud of smoke, taking in another puff as someone answered the other end of the phone. Hello? This is the medical examiner's office. How can I help you? A sweet voice on the other end of the phone answered the call. Yes, ma'am. this is Mrs. Johnson. I had a few missed calls. I responded back. Yes, Mrs. Johnson, we have been trying to get a hold of you. Do you mind holding for a moment while I let the doctor know you're on the phone? The young woman asked very kindly while seeming slightly worried. I don't mind at all. As quickly as the words left my mouth, she put the call on hold as she transferred me over to the doctor. The phone played the normal elevator kind of music while waiting for the doctor to come to the phone. Mrs. Johnson, this is Dr. English. We have been trying to get in touch with you over your sister's autopsy. I'm not sure how, but when we ran the DNA test, the results came back abnormal, to say the least. His voice sounded strained and cracking as he said it. I don't understand. What do you mean it came back abnormal? I was becoming worried. That wasn't the normal response you would get for a normal everyday autopsy. The DNA samples we took came back as something inhuman and non-animal. We ran the test 10 separate times with 10 different samples from her body. I've never seen anything like this before in my life, ma'am. Whatever is laying on my exam table isn't your sister. I don't know what it is, but it is definitely isn't human, he said as he slightly stuttered some of the words, trying to get them out of his mouth. His voice was worried, scared, and extremely confused by the whole thing. I dropped my phone as the words left his mouth. I sat there confused, lost in my thoughts. Inside my head, I just sat there with a confused look on my face. All of this was far too much for anyone to take, let alone try to process. I had completely forgot about my cigarette as I sat there. I hadn't taken a puff off of it in a while. Feeling it burn the inside of my pointer and middle finger, I jerked my hand, causing the cigarette to fall from my fingers. The pain from the burning cigarette brought me back to reality and out of my head. If it wasn't my sister that died in my bathtub, then who or what was it? I hope you guys enjoyed this week's chapters. I will narrate chapters 4 and 5 for next week. And if you guys are interested in the story, the links are in the description below. If you guys have a story that you would like me to narrate, my email is listed also down below. If you guys are interested in what products I use throughout the video, I also list those in the description down below. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you next week. Bye!